Hi, Fisherman Jerry here. Do you have rods that are missing their rod guides? They're broken, they're cracked, the centers have fallen out. Well, I want to show you a simple and inexpensive way to repair those without fancy equipment. And just for an example, I'm going to show you, this is one of my favorite Bass Pro Shop Johnny Morris Extreme rods. But you can see this rod guide is broken. Center's missing out of it. So what I want to do is show you how to remove these and replace them without fancy equipment, but just a few simple tools. The things you'll need will be some kind of braided line. I like fire line. And I use 14 pounds, which seems to work just fine. You'll need some kind of replacement rod tip. I use the Fuji's. You can get those at Cabela's, Bass Pro Shop, places like that, and they work really good. Good sharp knife or two, pair of clippers, and some kind of super glue. This is Gorilla Glue, but any kind of super glue will work just fine. But what we're going to do is walk through the steps of how to repair this cheaply and inexpensively with just these tools. One other thing that comes in handy right here is a clamp. Something that you can, when you get ready to attach the guide, clamp your rod down, hold it in place, it makes this work a whole lot easier if you've got that clamp. The first thing we're going to do is find an appropriate sized rod guide, and these come in different sizes from Fuji or whatever manufacturer. Fuji's the ones seem to work the best. So you find one that's approximately the same size as the one you're missing, and the first thing you've got to do is take all the plastic, because they wrap everything in plastic, of course. Get all the plastic off this rod guide and get it good and cleaned up and ready for putting on your rod. Now that we've got all the plastic off the rod guide, we're now going to work on the rod. We're going to take this old rod guide off with this good sharp knife, and from there we'll put the new one on. So what I like to do is start at the back side of the rod guide and just start carefully trimming off plastic material that's got it bound. You of course want to try to keep your blade flat to try to avoid cutting into the rod itself, but if you keep working at it, you'll get it to where you can eventually just peel these things off. And this one's a little tougher than usual, but you just keep working, and you'll see that it's gradually coming off here. We're just working our way around, and starting at the back makes it easier, because eventually you'll get it to where the front will just kind of peel off. So now I've been able to peel away pretty much everything, and I'm just going to get all the glue and excess material where this guide went. And of course, always remember to cut away from yourself, not towards yourself. Nice and clean. Now we're ready to place the new rod guide. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to take this cleaned off brand new Fuji guide. We're going to figure out where we're going to place it, and then we're going to apply super glue to the guide, set it in place where we want it to be. Make sure got it lined up the way we want it. Kind of marked it, and then I like to put just a little more super glue here so I know where my mark is. I'm going to take that guide, going to put it where we want it. Make sure it's lined up like you want it. Yep, that looks good. So we're going to let that sit for a minute and dry. I like to give it maybe 2 minutes so that it's not going anywhere. We'll be right back. Okay, we've been drying for about 2 minutes and it's pretty stable. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take about 5 feet of the fire line. I've pre-cut it. It's good to pre-cut it. Get you 5 feet of number 14 pound or 20 pound, whatever you've got. Fire line or some kind of braided line works really, really good. And then you tie you a simple knot at the top end of the guide. And then what we're going to do, we're going to loosen up the clamp. And we're just going to start rotating. Start rotating this fire line. Crossed over to the bottom. Cross back over to the top. Don't worry about the excess fire line right now. We'll cut that off later. And you just wind around from the top, or for a while on the top. And you cross back over to the bottom. And you wind both of the ends of those guides thoroughly. Keeping a little tension on it to get it good and tight. Cross back to the top for a minute. I always like to end on the bottom. Get to almost the end. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it down a couple of times. Tie it once. Tie it again. Tie it down one more time. Like I said, don't worry about this excess. We'll cut that off in a minute. Now what we're going to do is going to take our super glue and we're just going to start gluing the fire line all around and in the cracks and crevices. Rotate it around. Get it good and saturated all the way around. Super glue. Make sure you're doing this outdoors or somewhere where a little dripping super glue ain't gonna hurt anything. Now I just rotate it around a few times to let the super glue kind of distribute itself. You can see that, I'm just kind of rotating it around. Still haven't trimmed off the line yet. Still got some super glue that's kind of dripping a little bit, but that's alright. It's just kind of getting in the cracks and crevices. Go this way a little for a minute. Once you get it good and distributed, we'll just let this sit for a couple of minutes. And set up. Okay, we've let this dry for about 2-3 minutes. I went inside, got me a little more drink, non-alcoholic, and what we're going to do is we're going to now trim off the excess. You can use clippers with this fire line. I think a sharp knife actually is easier to do, so I'm going to trim that off as close as I can get it. Trim that off as close as I can get it. Alright. Alright, now what we've got is, here's an old fix I did. Good and solid, probably 5 years, 3 years, 4 years old. Made it through Hurricane Michael 2 years ago. Here's the brand new fix on this one. See, sturdy as it can be. Another old fix I did. So what you can see is that while this fix may not be quite as pretty as if it was done at the shop with the fancy machinery, it holds mighty good, and you can do it with just material that you've got at your house, along with a little super glue, a little fire line or some kind of braided line, and some Fuji guides. This works on spinning rods, bait casting rods. It really doesn't matter. The principle's the same. Hope you enjoy your repaired rod. Okay, I'm back, and this time we're going to repair one of these little small rod guides. You can see I put the top of the rod with replacement guide in a Fuji. Get all the plastic off of it. But this time we only have just one leg to the guide, not two. So the process is basically the same, but we're going to go through and learn how to do that as well. Everything's going to be the same up until you actually attach the rod guide. So we're going to start with cleaning off the old material. You've seen that already. So this is one of my favorite Johnny Morris Bass Pro Extreme rods, and of course we're a lot smaller in our rod, so we want to be real careful when you're trimming not to cut into the rod. Keep your blade as flat as you can keep it, and still get all this attachment material, whatever acrylic it is, off of here, and just keep scraping until you get it done. Just being very carefully, and of course remind you, always cut away from yourself, not towards yourself. We learned that in grade school as children, I assume. Even though most of us were taught to always cut away from ourselves, still a good reminder even for adults. Now I've got the metal part off, and I'm just kind of cleaning up the excess material that was on there. Getting that all off. Again, without trying not to damage, cut into the rod itself. Like I nicked a little bit into the rod here, but well into the coating on the rod, so I may cover that with a little super glue in a minute. But we've got the eye removed. So this is where clamp really comes in, because we're now on these little small areas. Yeah, a little trickier. So again, I've pre-cut me about 4 or 5 feet of fire line, 14 pound. I've got my glue ready, and I've got my guide ready. So what we're going to do is we're going to carefully place this guide in only one place now. So we're just going to have to hold on to it a little bit longer, get it like we like it. So we're going to put a little glue on the guide itself. Got some plastic on it, get rid of all that. And got some super glue on it. Check and see where I want it. Get it lined up here where I want it. And I'm going to hold it here for a minute. Try to get it good and tight. While I'm holding it, I'm going to look down and make sure I got it lined up like I want it. That's good. We'll hold it until it's set up enough that I can take my thumb off of it and rip off a little skin. So now, this is not as big a guide, so it actually doesn't take as much setting up, even though it's only got one of the feet to hold it in. They actually attach pretty good. This glue will eventually come off. And we're going to let it set up for a minute, and while we do it, we'll get our fire line out. Now we only have one side to worry about. And sometimes it's good to go ahead and tie your knot on these upper nuts and just slip it over. You get it good and tight. One thing I do sometimes is to make this thing wind easier, I'll put just a little bit of super glue right there. Just get this line to attach a little bit. It makes the winding process go better. I'll let that dry up for a second. And that's actually not a bad plan for doing the bigger guides as well. And let that set up for a second. And once we've gotten it a little bit dry, then we'll start the winding process again. Alrighty, we've got the glue kind of set up. And because this is a smaller single foot, I'm going to put a lot more of the super glue on it and a lot more of the fire line on it. So I'm going to twirl it a little tighter. Of course, you only got one side to twirl on now. So I'm going to twirl it pretty close together. Try to get a good tight twirl. And go all the way up and down the length of the foot. And make sure this bond holds. So you can see I've got the line a little tighter there. Wound a little bit closer than I have been on the bigger ones. And it doesn't hurt to wind the big ones closer, but they're not as critical. We'll tie this thing off a couple of times just so we can work with it. Alright. Got it tied off. I'm not going to cut it yet. I'll go ahead and super glue it. Again, super gluing all the way around in the line and the cracks. All the way around. Good tight bond. Then we're going to twirl it. Kind of soak in good. We're going to let it set up for a minute, get that super glue good and dry. May twirl it a few more times just so it doesn't drip. I'm going to turn off the camera until we get good and dry here. Okay, we've let it sit for a couple of minutes. Get good and dry. I'm going to trim off the excess line here with my knife. And if I can get it trimmed. This is where your clippers come in handy. Get this line trimmed good. And I'm going to get it a little drier before I trim it. But bottom line is, you can see it's good and tight. We'll trim the rest up in a minute here. Good and tight. I can hold this rod with the guide. There's no problem. It's good and solid. So there you have it. There's how you do a single-footed guide repair in a narrow part of your rod. Well, I hope all your rods are back in repair and you're ready to go fishing, because I know I am. It's July right now and the water temperature where I fish is about 90 degrees, so I'm going to wait about another month before I launch the boat and go hook into some speckled trout. Hope you've enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time. This is Fisherman Jerry.